The United States just made a mistake that could change North American trade forever. And it happened because of 5 simple demands, 5 conditions. That's what Washington placed in front of Canada. 5 things the Trump administration insists Canada must agree to if it wants to keep the most critical trade deal on the continent alive. Let me break down what those 5 demands are. Dairy market access, changes to digital content laws, lifting alcohol bans, government purchasing rules, and energy policy adjustments. 5 demands meant to completely reshape how 2 of the world's biggest trading partners do business. Mark Carney reviewed that entire list and delivered one answer: no. Not to just one demand, not to a few of them, to all 5. This isn't about being difficult. This is about calculated strategy, because each demand Trump's team made actually shows how much the United States relies on Canada, and Carney sees it clearly. Today, we're breaking down how Trump's own list accidentally revealed just how dependent America really is on its northern neighbor, why rejecting every demand actually strengthens Canada's position instead of weakening it, how this trade review has become a strategic battle where Carney holds more leverage than Washington ever anticipated, and why letting this agreement fall apart would damage American workers, consumers, and factories far more than anyone in Trump's circle wants to acknowledge. But before we get into the details, if you value deep analysis like this, please hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss the stories that really count. So what exactly is the United States asking for? U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer appeared before Congress and spelled out the demands in detail. No vague language, no hidden conditions, just a clear public checklist of what Washington expects Canada to accept if it wants the trade deal renewed for another 16 years. First demand, dairy access. The United States wants more room in Canada's protected dairy market. Currently, American dairy companies can send limited amounts into Canada without tariffs. Anything beyond that limit faces tariffs as high as 200 to nearly 300%. Greer said Canada's system is unfair. He argued it blocks American producers from competing on a level playing field. Carney's answer came within 24 hours. He said Canada's dairy system is off limits, not negotiable, not up for discussion, done. He delivered that response in French, a clear message to Quebec, where dairy farming supports thousands of families and the supply management model is considered untouchable politically. Canada even passed a law in June making this protection permanent. It's not just policy anymore. It's locked in by legislation. Greer can ask all he wants. The answer is already written into law. Second demand, digital content rules. Canada recently passed laws that require streaming platforms like Netflix, Spotify, and YouTube to follow Canadian broadcasting standards. These companies must invest part of their earnings into Canadian-made content. Another law forces platforms to pay Canadian news organizations when they share or link to their articles. Greer called these laws unfair to American tech giants. He claims they create obstacles that hurt U.S. digital companies. Canada's stance is straightforward. These laws exist to protect Canadian culture, Canadian creators, and Canadian journalism. Without them, American platforms would dominate Canadian screens and silence local voices completely. Carney has shown zero interest in changing these laws. Removing them would mean handing cultural control over to Silicon Valley. That's not a deal Canada is willing to accept. Third demand, provincial alcohol restrictions. Some Canadian provinces banned American beer and wine imports in response to Trump's tariffs. Ontario and British Columbia were among those who joined the effort. Greer wants those bans removed as part of extending the trade agreement. Here's what Washington seems to have overlooked. Those bans only exist because Trump imposed tariffs first. Take away the tariffs and the bans disappear on their own. But Greer is asking Canada to drop the bans while leaving the tariffs in place. That's not negotiation. That's asking Canada to take the hits without defending itself. Carney isn't agreeing to that. The bans remain until the tariffs are gone. Fourth demand, government purchasing. Greer pointed to what he described as biased purchasing policies in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia. These provincial governments prefer buying Canadian products over American ones. Greer wants those policies reversed, but buying locally isn't a trade violation. Governments around the world do it constantly. The United States does it too. Buy American laws, made in America requirements on military contracts, federal preferences for domestic suppliers on everything from steel to software. Washington Washington demanding that Canada stop buying Canadian while keeping its own Buy American rules isn't a legitimate concern. It's contradiction disguised as a trade issue. Fifth demand, energy policy. Greer raised concerns about how Alberta handles electricity distribution with Montana. The claim is that Alberta's grid operator favors in-province energy generation over imports from the United States during certain times. Alberta's utilities minister denied the claim outright. He said there's no unfair treatment happening. But here's the bigger energy picture. The United States imports about 3.8 million barrels of Canadian crude oil every single day. 23% of what American refineries process comes from Canada. Gulf Coast refineries were specifically designed to handle Canadian heavy crude. New England depends on Canadian electricity to keep power running during winter. Energy doesn't just flow one direction, it flows both ways, and Canada's role in that flow cannot be replaced. Why saying no to everything is actually brilliant strategy. Here's where most people misunderstand this situation. The common assumption is that refusing 5 demands makes Canada look weak, uncooperative, and gives Trump reasons to threaten walking away. But Carney isn't just refusing. He's refusing while holding resources that Washington desperately needs. Think about what each demand really tells us. Trump wants more dairy access. That suggests American dairy producers are struggling in global markets and need Canadian buyers to survive. Trump wants digital laws changed. That means American tech companies are losing billions because Canada requires them to invest locally. Trump wants purchasing rules changed. That means Canadian governments are successfully keeping money inside Canada instead of sending it south. Every single demand is proof that Canada is doing something that works, something that benefits Canadians at America's expense. Greer just handed over a list of Canadian policies that are succeeding, and Carney's responsibility is to protect every single one. The demand list didn't mention the biggest issue in North American trade, automobiles, and that silence is extremely telling. The auto industry across North America is deeply connected. Canadian factories make parts that go into American trucks. American factories make engines that go into Canadian cars. Supply chains cross the border dozens of times before a finished vehicle is completed. Major automakers told Congress that the trade agreement is vital to their operations. The American Automotive Policy Council, representing Detroit's big 3 automakers, said the agreement saves tens of billions of dollars annually through regional cooperation. General Motors President Mark Reese said supply chains run through all 3 countries and the complexity is massive. Trump imposed tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and cars anyway. He disrupted the very integration that American manufacturers depend on. Now, those same manufacturers are pleading with the administration not to let the agreement expire, because without it, tariffs become permanent and the integrated supply chains that keep American auto plants operational start collapsing. Carney understands this completely. That's why the auto sector is Canada's secret weapon. Not dairy, not streaming laws, the auto industry. Because if the trade deal falls apart, American car manufacturers lose more than anyone else. Mark Carney's move with China that shifted everything. Carney visited Beijing and negotiated what he described as friendly nation trade arrangements with China. Mutual tariff reductions on canola, electric vehicles, and agricultural goods. Not a full free trade deal. A focused arrangement that removes specific barriers that had been hurting Canadian farmers for years. Trump initially praised the decision. He said that's exactly what Carney should be doing. Then he completely changed his position within days. He posted on social media threatening 100% tariffs if Canada becomes what he called a drop-off port for China. But Carney clarified right away. Canada is not pursuing a full free trade agreement with China. The arrangement does not violate the existing trade deal. It does not trigger the clause that would allow the United States to end the agreement. Dominic LeBlanc, Canada's trade minister, spoke directly with Jameson Greer and explained exactly what the arrangement involves and what it doesn't. Greer understood. The real effect of the China arrangement isn't about canola or electric cars. It's about proving Canada can build trade relationships outside the United States. That Canadian farmers have options, that Canadian exporters aren't permanently tied to American markets. Every alternative trade path Canada creates makes it easier for Carney to walk away from a bad deal with Washington. 3 possible outcomes starting in July: extend for 16 years, withdraw completely, or trigger annual reviews that keep negotiations open until the agreement expires in 2036. Most experts assume Canada will accept whatever deal Washington offers because the alternative seems worse. But that assumption was based on the old Canada, the Canada that sent 75% of its exports to the United States and had nowhere else to turn if Washington walked away. Carney's Canada is different. The China arrangement creates agricultural export routes to the world's second largest economy. European partnerships are growing. The Buy Canadian policy redirects $70 billion to domestic suppliers. Critical minerals give Canada leverage that didn't exist 5 years ago because the United States desperately needs them to compete with China in clean energy and artificial intelligence. If the agreement doesn't get extended, annual reviews begin. That creates a decade of ongoing uncertainty. But uncertainty hurts American businesses just as much as Canadian ones. The American companies that told Congress how essential the agreement is, they're the ones who panic most when the deal looks unstable. Nearly 150 U.S. industry leaders told Congress the agreement must continue. Steel producers, automakers, energy companies, agricultural exporters, all of them watching Greer's demands and quietly hoping Canada doesn't actually refuse everything. But Canada is refusing everything, and the American business community is the first group that will pressure the Trump administration to return to the table with reasonable terms. Before the demands were even made public, Carney traveled to the World Economic Forum in Davos and delivered a speech that changed the conversation about smaller nations and economic pressure. He warned that smaller countries should never accept economic submission to larger powers. He said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. The audience gave him a standing ovation. European leaders publicly praised the speech. Journalists called it the most important address by a Canadian leader in decades. Trump's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent responded within days. He called the speech virtue signaling to globalists. He said Carney rose to power on an anti-American, anti-Trump platform. And that's not a great position when you're negotiating with the world's largest economy. But Bessent completely missed the point. The Davos speech wasn't about attacking Washington. It was about building alliances, creating a network of middle powers that share the same concerns about economic pressure from great powers. Canada, Europe, the Indo-Pacific, all listening to the same message, all looking for alternatives to dependence on a single dominant trading partner. Why Trump's own administration knows the deal matters. Here's the contradiction at the center of Washington's position. Trump calls the trade agreement outdated. He said it offers no real benefits to the United States. He called it temporary. He suggested it may have already served its purpose. But Greer told Congress that the United States exported $960 billion in goods and services to Canada and Mexico under the agreement. Exports increased 56% since the agreement took effect. That the overwhelming majority of American business and labor groups believe the agreement should continue. You don't spend months outlining conditions for extending an agreement you genuinely think is worthless. You don't send your trade representative to Congress with a detailed demand list if you plan to walk away. Trump is posturing, playing the role of the tough negotiator who doesn't need anyone. But the numbers tell a different story. The United States needs this agreement, needs Canadian resources, needs Canadian auto parts, needs Canadian energy, needs Canadian critical minerals. Greer's demand list isn't a list of things Trump wants Canada to surrender. It's a list of things that show exactly how much Washington needs Ottawa. And Carney is reading that list very carefully. Trump invited Carney to join his Board of Peace initiative for Gaza. Then he withdrew the invitation publicly on social media after the Davos speech. He posted a formal letter uninviting Canada. He called the board the most prestigious assembly of leaders ever formed. The public snub made international headlines. Exactly the wrong kind of headlines for an administration that needs Canada to sign a trade agreement extension in a few months, because now every time Washington demands something from Ottawa, the world watches a leader who was publicly embarrassed by the President of the United States. Every demand looks less like negotiation and more like intimidation. Every refusal by Carney looks like strength instead of stubbornness. Trump thought withdrawing the board invitation would weaken Carney politically. Instead, it made Carney look like the responsible leader, like someone who refuses to be manipulated, like a prime minister who puts Canadian interests above staying in Trump's favor. What Carney built while Trump was posting. The refusal to accept 5 demands isn't just a bargaining tactic. It's the result of months of careful, deliberate preparation. The China arrangement created agricultural alternatives. The Davos speech built international alliances. The Buy Canadian policy redirected domestic spending. Critical mineral strategies positioned Canada as an essential partner for American clean energy and artificial intelligence goals. Provincial governments aligned behind federal trade positions. The auto strategy brought Ontario and Ottawa together. While Trump was posting about governors and 51st states and drop-off ports, Carney was building the foundation of economic independence. Every insult gave him political cover to move faster. Every threat justified another alternative trade route. Every demand revealed another Canadian advantage. The trade agreement review in July is not going to be a moment where Canada desperately accepts whatever Washington demands. It's going to be a moment where Carney walks into the room with a strategy that took 12 months to build. 5 demands, 5 refusals, and a country that's less dependent on the United States than it has been in 50 years. So what happens next? Trump needs this deal more than he'll ever publicly admit. The American auto industry needs it. The energy sector needs it. Agricultural exporters need it. Tech companies need it. Nearly every major American industry that testified before Congress said so on the record. Carney doesn't need it on Trump's terms. Not anymore. Canada has alternatives now. Real alternatives, not promises, not plans, actual trade routes, actual partnerships, actual domestic policies that redirect money away from American suppliers, 5 demands, 5 refusals, and somewhere in Washington, American business leaders are reading the same news and quietly hoping that someone in the White House realizes that demanding everything and getting nothing is not a negotiation strategy. It's a losing one. Trump wanted Canada to surrender. Carney refused every single demand. And the trade agreement review is shaping up to be the moment where Canada proves that saying no to the most powerful economy on earth is not weakness. It's the first step toward the end of American economic control over North America.